Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. We're here to talk Seahawks football. We've got a great show for you lined up today. We're going to be talking a little bit of roster analysis, getting you ready for essentially free agency and the rest of the offseason. We're going to talk about our own roster, how it's constructed, what our biggest holes are heading into this offseason, potential cap casualties, add to that list, and just kind of want to set the stage for how we're going to approach free agency and the draft moving forward. And this show kind of does that. We coming off of the salary cap show we just did this last week, and this one made a lot of sense to kind of put it all together and get you ready for the off season. So welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Before we jump into all of that, let's update everybody on where things stand on the offensive coordinator search, because we got a new name and we've got a couple of guys that have come back for a second interview. So, there's been some movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and talk about it and tell me your thoughts overall of kind of where you're at, where you think the team's at.
So what, the new name that we got was Byron Leftwich, former NFL quarterback, turned quarterback coach, part of the Bruce Arians coaching tree, worked his way up from, quality control all the way up to offensive coordinator. It was Bruce Arians offensive coordinator for 4 years in Tampa. I think 1 year in Arizona and then 3 years in Tampa.
Kind of under Bruce Arians there for a while.
Yep. And had either the number 1 or number 2 offense in the league 3 of those 4 years. Pass heavy offense, which is not really what Seattle has been.
That's the surprising thing to me, and maybe you can kind of address that a little bit.
Well, I think it has to do with the fact that while they were, average 20th in the league in rushing yards, they were one of the heaviest play action pass teams. So they ran it effectively, just maybe not as much as we'd think, but as long as you're running it very effectively, when you do run it, you can still run off play action. And that's the kind of thing that, Seattle definitely didn't do this year and should have. And so, there's that.
What do you make of him being out of the league for a couple of years and just kind of, off the radar, essentially?
Well, he's been out of the coaching ranks. He hasn't been completely off the radar of the league. He's been basically contracting his time out as a scout and doing some individual quarterback coaching work all on the side with young NFL players and some college players. And so he's still around football, but he hasn't been coaching. He wanted some time away and took it away and is trying to get back into it now. He actually interviewed for the Patriots head coaching job, which was a little surprising given that you knew the moment that they let Gerard Mayo go that Mike Vrabel was the guy. I've seen people say that, he's just the Rooney Rule candidate. But at the same time, he's interested. That's how he's viewed as a guy that could be in that path now that he's trying to get back into the league. So it's worth looking at. It's worth thinking about. I don't think the team will go that route. He doesn't fit the description of everyone else that they've hired. He's kind of a different name, but he is relatively young and he's done the job. He's done it extremely well and offers a different coaching tree to tap into, a different way of doing things and thinking about things. And so it's an interesting interview. I don't think he'll be the guy. But yeah, he was one of the 2 mystery names. We still are missing one of the mystery names. We don't know who that is. They did invite 2 people back that they'd already interviewed. One is the guy that you and I are both really high on, Clint Kubiak. I was not surprised at all that he was back in town on Friday interviewing again. I
And
still
he's
think
the guy
he's,
that we both predicted. Well, we both put as our number one choice going
yeah.
back to our first show about this. As soon as Ryan Grubb was fired, we had a show. We talked
Mm-hmm.
about potential candidates. At that time, nobody had been brought in yet. He was definitely the number one name out of many, many, many names. We
Yeah.
both kind of thought that it would be the best schematic fit combined with the youth at the spot, and kind of marrying up with what Mike McDonald wants to do. So no surprise to us that would be
Mm-hmm.
there. Now the second interview. Now the first one, I guess, was a Zoom meeting, kind of general marrying up of ideas, making sure, you know, schematically everything's looking good, and then the in person one is really the big factor to make sure that everything's jiving. Obviously, they're not going to bring them in, waste anybody's time. These things get quite serious if you're going to the second interview, because these things happen pretty fast in the NFL. Once you get
Mm-hmm.
past that second interview, and they've got a couple of candidates that are at the second interview, really, that's it. You're kind of a finalist.
Yeah.
So, talk to me
And
about the other guy.
the other guy, Udinsky, honestly, I was almost disappointed that he was brought in for a second interview. The
Really,
guy's, yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm really not going to be excited if that's the
he
hire.
must be amazing, Keith, to get that second interview.
Yeah, okay, do it for another couple years. He's 28. He's going to be younger than a bunch of his players.
They would be
Um,
surrounding him with a team of competent coaches.
it doesn't matter. You still have to
But
command the room.
this might be a situation where they look at this like, listen, this guy's the premier up and coming coach in the entire league, and this is our opportunity to get him under our umbrella, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. I'm not saying it's the right move. I'm just saying sometimes this is the way that coaches, it works. It's like you never know what's going to go on in those interviews, and this kid could be blowing everyone away and just be like, we need to figure out how to work this thing, because we can't let this kid leave the building.
He's never done a job. He's always been the assistant of the job. He's never been a quarterback coach. He's the assistant quarterback coach. He's never been, um, he's always been an assistant position coach. And then they gave him the assistant offensive coordinator title this last year. Um, he's
Promoted
never,
twice in the last 2 years within the same organization.
he's never actually done a job. He's only been the assistant to the guy doing the job. And like at any level of coaching, that doesn't uh have you like at least a little worried,
Absolutely.
because
It
it's
does.
got
Yeah.
because
No question.
at some point you aren't the guy, you're
He
never the
would
guy
have to
leading the
be
meeting.
so top 1%, uniquely qualified and special, like beyond, for him to get a second interview and to be hired at this point, if they choose to go that way, would have to be like such a skewed individual as far as being better, like in leaps and bounds above Kubiak and above anybody else that they might consider, that I think I would be okay with it, because I know that they would have to have a plan, you know.
See, there is a problem with that though. The problem with that is that people sometimes see what they want to see instead of what's in front of them. And everybody has been looking for the next Sean McVay since Sean McVay. And if you're so desperate to try and find that young, around 30, just under, just over, year old, like prodigy, you may be looking and seeing it in someone who's not quite there. Um, and I'm not, I want to see the guy actually do a job. not be the assistant of a guy that does a job, but he has never actually.
Somebody's got to be the first place to give him that opportunity.
Yeah, he then be the quarterback coach, right? And assistant offensive coordinator. At least then he will have had to run a meeting and be in charge of a room. He's always been, he can always refer to someone else and be like, "Yep, the person above me is the guy that." He can always pass the buck. And it's different. It just is. You have to be able to command the room yourself, not command the room on someone else's authority. And look, I'm just worried. I've never seen him coach. I've never seen him teach. I don't know anything about him. I've never talked to him or seen him do a press conference or any of that. I don't know anything. I just am very leery of a guy that's that inexperienced.
I agree. Now, you could say the same thing about Fraley in a way. Now, he's been the offensive line coach for the Lions, but doesn't have that extra special sauce that you want your offensive coordinator to have. Like, he would have to have a pass game coordinator. I was thinking, like, if the Fraley thing happened, well, that potentially. Now they have to be in agreement. They have to like each other, all that kind of stuff. But potentially you could have a guy like Udinsky marry up with a guy like Fraley, and that could be quite a combo.
You're not getting both.
Maybe they're trying to do that.
You can't. There's no way to have both because it has to be a promotion.
Well, it is a promotion. Udinsky could be the quarterback's coach and pass game coordinator. That's a promotion. Fraley's going to go offensive coordinator. That's a promotion.
Okay. I'm just saying, I don't know if Udinsky is able to take part of his job, the assistant quarterback's coach. And
I think what would happen. I think what would happen is Minnesota would promote him yet again to keep him. If he's that special.
I don't. We'll see.
Let's talk about Kubiak.
He's instantly special.
So let's talk about Kubiak again. It seems like that's the guy that they would be. That seems like in the 1A position to get the job. I haven't heard anything, which doesn't surprise me at all, out of the Seahawks facility. These interviews, both apparently conducted yesterday, one right after the other, and haven't heard a word. So not sure what to make of that other than potentially in deep negotiations.
Yeah. And that's the thing is you have both guys there. If you're negotiating with one over contract, you don't tell the other one that they're out of it yet because you have that other option as leverage, in the negotiation. I would be willing to bet that this is solved this weekend or Monday, Tuesday, and one of those two guys is hired. I want it to be Kubiak. I think that's pretty clear. He's been an offensive coordinator. He's been an effective offensive coordinator. And he's done the job. Can't say Udinsky's has that going for him. He's never.
I think that this could potentially both be the safe pick and the home run pick at the same time.
Well, he's 37. It's not like we're taking some old retread. This is a very young up and coming guy who was running the Saints offense, and his boss got fired, and so he became available.
You're out there, you hear the idea that, well, it doesn't really matter anyway. If he does a good job, he's going to be gone. That's just the nature of having a defensive oriented head coach, is you're always going to be on the hunt looking for an offensive coordinator. Well, that's a good problem to have. If he does a great job, you're winning. And quite frankly, this is, if it does happen every other year, or every year even, where your coach is getting poached for a head coaching opportunity somewhere, it doesn't make this selection or choice any less important.
Yeah.
It's got to happen like this every other year. It just does. And if that's the case, that's the case. But
Well, I look at it at you look at let's just look at Seahawk history with Pete Carroll, right? They had Gus Bradley for 2 years, and he gets hired away. This is a defensive coordinator. Then they have um, the guy who's currently the head coach of Washington, Dan Quinn, for 2 years, and then he gets hired away. And then they move on to Chris Richard, who's there for 3 years, and then they make the switch. And that, it, coordinators change, right? They do, and you have to have either a pipeline of people coming in that are you're
mhm.
grooming to be the next one, or you're going to have to go hire out of the outside of the organization. And it happens on both sides of the ball. If a guy is good on either side of the ball, they're going to get poached for a head coaching gig. It's more, it happens faster for offensive coaches. It's true, but it happens, for defensive coaches too. Um, if they hire Kubiak and in 2 years they're out looking for another offensive coordinator, fine, go find the next Kubiak. Um,
Yes. Right.
so I mean,
And if
and
you
that's
have Kubiak and you hired Kubiak this year and it works out tremendously and we end up going to the Super Bowl and he gets poached, well, that was totally worth it. I mean, and it also gives you confidence that they can do it again. Like they did it once, they'll do it again, etc.
yeah.
Okay. So, and that's all we know. There's no announcements as of pushing record on Saturday
Mm-hmm.
morning. Let's talk about this roster, the position group analysis that we want to do, the biggest holes of the off season, what we can look forward to as far as filling positions and anticipating situations on the roster. I think the first one that we should talk about because it basically dictates the rest of the moves would be a long-term answer at quarterback. We've been talking about this for a couple of years now. We've been talking about the idea that, Geno Smith is a bridge quarterback. He's a good, solid bridge option quarterback in this league and for this team until we can find the longer term solution for developing a quarterback or having a quote unquote franchise guy come
Mm-hmm.
in, which is exceedingly difficult in the NFL to do. If you don't have a top 2 or 3 pick, you're not going to hit one of those quote unquote guaranteed guys in the draft, which is less and less a factor I'm seeing over time. You almost just have to luck out into a quarterback that really works out in the NFL. Saw that this last year with Bo Nix. I was really high on Bo Nix. You were less high on Bo Nix. Turns out Bo Nix ends up being a very good quarterback in the NFL, probably the best quarterback in the draft from last year as far as results on the field. Now, long term, that could change. Jaden
You're
Daniels obviously is
like
there,
Jaden
and a few other
Daniels
guys.
had, I would say he had the better year. And saying that I was not high on Bo Nix, I think is inaccurate. I was very high on Bo Nix. Um,
But
I
the year
was,
before, we were kind of both high on Will Levis, and turns out he didn't end up being a very good quarterback so far in the
well,
NFL. It's just
he
hard. It's
he
hard
wasn't
to
actually
analyze.
wasn't given a chance and on a really really awful dysfunctional team. So we'll see what happens
Right,
with that
right,
long
right, right.
term.
But there's
But
no
yeah, I mean,
guarantees in the draft, is what I'm saying, and it's
yeah,
very difficult to get a free agent quarterback, and it's difficult to pull off a trade, and all these things. It's hard to find that quarterback that's going to take you. If you can magically think of like 6 years into the future on your team, it's just really hard to identify that. Very few teams in the NFL do. We had one at one point with Russell Wilson, obviously Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. There's a few others, but you can count them on
Justin
one hand
Herbert, yeah,
almost, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
long term answer with Geno Smith is Geno Smith the quarterback in 2025? Why or why not?
Um, yes, because there's no other option.
Essentially, yes.
I mean that you give me a binary choice, yes or no, it's going to be that one. It's not Sam Howell. Sam Howell's on the roster again for next year. The only way it's Sam Howell is if uh, basically they're saying we are going to go after a draft pick, getting a high first rounder to go get a quarterback in the future. That's what Washington did. I mean, let's be
Now,
honest. They did not believe in Sam Howell as a long-term solution. They believed in him as a guy that could get them Jaden Daniels, and it did. So I could very much, that's who Sam Howell is. He's at 25, still young guy, still developing. Maybe there's more to him than that, but um, he's a backup quarterback, and I think that he's a good backup quarterback, and that's all he's ever going to be is a good backup, but not quite good enough to be a starter. Um, and so, where are you going to get your quarterback? Unless you're going to go make a trade for JJ McCarthy and be willing to give up that 18th pick in the first round to get him,
probably plus more.
maybe. But yeah, unless you're willing to do that, who's going to be your quarterback? Because the Seahawks aren't going to do what Washington did and tank for a year. They're not willing to tank. And so I don't think they're willing to go, guess what? Here, Sam Howell's going to run out there and get us, the third overall pick in the draft. They're not willing to do that. So who's your other option?
Yeah. There's a couple of guys that I listen to in Seahawks blogosphere, and that would be like Rob Staten and Kenneth Arthur, Seaside Joe newsletter, that sort of stuff. And both guys are advocating, or not advocating, but are basically saying the way that they see it is that the Seahawks will choose not to extend Geno Smith and will not let him play on a $44 million deal this year. Therefore, he will be off the roster. Seahawks will then allocate funds somewhere else, magically thinking that a better quarterback option will be available to them in 2025. And I've just I've looked all over the place. Unless you go with a rookie in the second round, third round option, even if you overdraft a guy at 18, it would be not idiotic. It would be very much the most riskiest possible move that you could make, not only as a GM, but as a head coach on a roster that's got 10 wins, where you can conceivably push some, move
If you
some
can get,
switches around just a little bit. You can probably get to 12 wins with
if you had
this
an
roster,
offensive
with this
line
quarterback.
and a competent coordinator, you would have been at 12 wins this year.
Right. And to throw it all out with a rookie starting quarterback doesn't make the most sense to me, given the pressures in the NFL to win now with a roster that you're close to winning now with, and trying to be competitive in the playoffs. It seems like keeping Geno seems like the most logical outcome. I know it's not the long-term thing, and it's not, there's a lot of Geno detractors out there and so forth. But if you're really, really honest, Geno gives you the best opportunity to win. You already know his floor is at 9 wins. His ceiling could be higher if there are certain position groups enhanced around him, I think.
Agreed. Now 44 million cap number for a Geno caliber quarterback is how
Absurd.
GMs get fired.
Yes, right.
I mean, because you're looking at the New York Giants, who looked at a situation and said, we know Daniel Jones isn't the guy. Like, he isn't an elite quarterback, but we either pay him or we go with nothing. They chose to pay him, had to empty out part of the rest of the roster in order to pay him, and it got everybody fired. And if you're paying Geno Smith that much money, where you have to empty out part of the roster, to keep him, simply because he's the best option, not because he's worth that, That's how general managers get fired.
I think what
And
you
so
have
there's
to do here is go ahead.
I want to say, so you have to marry those two positions. I think that people are like, oh yeah, he's going to be gone. And I've read a couple of different places where, he's in the top 20 like biggest salary cap cuts to expect, and lists like that, which I don't think that's true. I think you have to find a way to keep him, but you also have to find a way to lower his cap number into something that is more suitable for his
And you kick the
uh
can down the road. When the
yeah.
salary cap increases in 2026 or 2027, you're going to, the percentage of the cap overall that he takes on the roster is going to be reduced, even if that cap number increases in 2026. And you just kind of, you get him back down into the 28 range or the
Yeah.
26 range or whatever like that. And you save, $18 million off his potential cap hit, and you can allocate those funds elsewhere.
See, he has
And
no guaranteed money for next year, and a huge cap number. That combination is part of the reason why everyone's like, he's going to get cut, um, because you can cut him, you don't have to pay him another dime, and you move on. But I think what you do is you take advantage of the fact that he's got no guaranteed money for next year, and you go to him and you say, hey, rather than you play on a non-guaranteed contract or get cut and figure out if you can find a starting job, not a non-backup job in free agency. How about if we give you a significantly lower salary, but we guarantee it, and you can have a guaranteed contract for next year? That's the kind of leverage that you can use in that kind of negotiation, because players and agents want those contracts to be as guaranteed as
especially
possible.
at 35 years old.
Yeah. So giving him an opportunity to get guaranteed money next year, um, might be what it takes to get him to just take an outright pay cut, and get his cap number under control.
Okay. So we both expect Geno Smith to be back on a reduced cap number,
Mm-hmm.
and a small extension to make that happen. I think that seems to make the most sense, and I think that the percentage of that likelihood is probably, on the other side of 80%. There just isn't, the alignment with the draft, it being a quarterback poor draft to begin with, and other needs on the roster, and being close to winning, and going into the playoffs with a coach that wants to win, with a new offensive coordinator coming in and a GM that wants to keep his job. I think that makes the most sense. Let's talk about the offensive line, Keith. This is the biggest hole, I think, on the
Oh yeah,
roster.
very much.
And there's a number of things you can do. Let's talk about the center position, and let's talk about the interior guard positions, first and foremost.
Well, so at center, you've got two guys currently on the roster, Olu Oluwatimi and Mike Nowitzki. Nowitzki was signed.
Jalen Sundell.
He's not actually on the roster currently,
I think
according
they're
to
okay. I think
at
he'll be
least.
back.
Yeah, I do too. But I don't have him on the roster.
I think, wouldn't he be a restricted guy? I didn't. I haven't
His
looked.
name is also not on the list of free agents, and he would very much be a restricted guy. That's weird. Okay. But yeah, and Sundell is the guy who was second on the depth chart over Nowitzki. I think Nowitzki gets I mean, he's a futures contract, absolute minimum
He's
contract kind
he's
of deal.
he's got a futures deal. Nine
Sundell
hundred
did?
$60,000. Yeah, he's just not
Okay.
in the top 51 contracts.
Oh, that's where it is. Okay. Yeah, so that works. Yeah, so they've got a trio of potential backups. Um, I mean, Oluwatimi he's a guy that, he started part of the year. There's some things that he does well that you could be like, okay, maybe we can build on that. But
Hmm.
there's also plenty of things he doesn't do well, and therefore is um, limiting. Um, Sundell is a bigger guy, a little more athletic, but so I think higher ceiling, but significantly lower floor too. And so the Seahawks made the mistake of going into this last season thinking that uh, they had a couple of guys that are careerish backups, including Oluwatimi, and that one of them would emerge, and neither of them did. And it became a mess. It caused them to go get Connor Williams, who did not perform up to expectation, and then retired suddenly mid-season, um, and forced Oluwatimi in there. This is a position that needs an upgrade. Now, if they choose not to, and they go with Oluwatimi and Sundal next year, but have major upgrades at both guard spots beside him, maybe you can get away with that. But you would
Right.
need.
And I think that would be the order of priority, is to upgrade the 2 guard spots before you look at center, just because Oluwatimi did hold it down with 2 fairly poor guards playing next to him. So
Mhm.
that tells me I have a little bit more hope and faith that Oluwatimi can hold that down. But the guard spots have to be upgraded. Even if you bring Lamea back or Christian Haynes improves, you still need to add competition and I think a veteran presence to those
Mhm.
spots.
Well, the problem that is, I mean, I agree that they have to, but yeah, I mean, you're looking at you have to go find between those. This is the same spot they were in last year. Between the 3 spots, the 2 guards and the center, you need 2 new starters that
Yes,
are major upgrades, not just new names, new legit starters.
right,
Because at guard, right now under contract, you've got Christian Haynes, who lost 2 different position battles, both one against Bradford, who was terrible, and one against Lumea, who was only slightly better. Um, and it's like those are the names that are on the roster.
right.
You've
And in
got
free agency, I'd love to see him. I mean, if Trey Smith is out there, I don't care if he costs $24 million a year. I think you go get Trey Smith, right, at left guard. You go get
no.
like a Micah Becton to play right guard for you, the most powerful right guard free agent out there, or Will Hernandez or somebody. I mean, you've got to go at
I
least
think
get
you got to go
one
get
of
at least
those 3
one
guys.
name. You got to go
Yeah,
get one name at guard and plug that in, which will be a major upgrade because you won't have Lake and Tomlinson there being awful. Um, and then you hope that one of the other 3 guys emerges at right guard. I think that's a
and
more
draft
likely
and draft a
scenario.
guy high in the
And
draft
then
that can compete with that.
either that or center, and or maybe you have to move a couple of those. Maybe you move one of those guard um, projects like Lumea to center and add him to the mix as a guy that could become a starter. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, or you get a placeholder guy like Ryan Kelly in free agency, 32-year-old from
yeah,
Indianapolis, guy that's a leader in the locker room, which I think they lack a little bit on that offensive line. Charles Cross is a fine player, but he's very soft spoken. They've got Abe Lucas, but he's been injured, so it's been hard for him to kind of lead from the sidelines, if you will.
hmm
So a guy like Ryan Kelly, who's that alpha leader type, to come in and play for a season or 2, I think might be a good thing for the Seahawks. He wouldn't break the bank, but it's not going to come cheap. But if there was a way that you could upgrade all 3 positions, uh, you got to almost throw everything you've got at it this
yeah.
offseason. I think, in fact, I think that John Schneider's job's on the line to be able to do this.
See, I don't think that. I don't think his job's on the line. I'm not of the
If you
opinion
have an
that
offensive line that's going to hold your team back from getting to the playoffs or doing anything once you're in the playoffs again for like the 3rd straight season, your job's on the line.
I,
That's what you're supposed to do as a GM. That's your job.
I don't think his job's on the line. I think the team won 10 games and um, was the last team that didn't make the playoffs with a rookie head coach, and they recognized the problem to be grub and made the change there, I don't think his job's on the line. I don't think that unless this team bottoms out and wins 4 games, I I think that Schneider has a longer leash.
Interesting. Okay, so offensive line. After that, what is your biggest need on the roster, Keith?
Um, After that, I would say, well, okay, are we assuming that Ernest Jones was re-signed?
Yeah, well, that's definitely on my list. Like
Because
of the things that you'd have to, if you turn your attention to the defense, and we move off the offense for a minute. The defense as a whole improved, and we can kind of count on them getting better next season because they'll have an entire season of being better. They were better for the last 8 games or whatever. If they can continue that, they're top 5 defense. I
yeah,
think, but that really does key to me. The key is like maybe finding one more elite defensive lineman or edge rusher and re-signing Ernest Jones and maybe
yeah,
adding some depth at corner, but
you
really
need a
the
corner.
defense is more solvable than the offense, I think.
So I look at it and I'm like, if you re-sign Ernest Jones, if they can get that contract done, because to me that's the first priority. You do that in this offseason before you do anything else, other than clear the cap space you
You've
need to
already
get
got
to
the
the final
player, you
roster.
like the player, he likes Seattle, he's a good fit in the scheme. You
Yeah,
got to just get that done. Otherwise, you can go out in free agency, but there's no guarantees, right? You've already
look
got
what
a
happened
player
last
that's
year.
literally guaranteed to work. So
Yeah.
might as well make it work.
And so yeah, so I look at that. As far as edge rushers, I would agree with you that you need one. A defensive lineman would be great, or you could bring back Jerron Reed if you can get him,
Mm-hmm.
on a reasonable there's
I
different
think we
things to do
both
that.
see that Dre Jones is likely not to return, at least on that number, and you're
Dre
going to need
Jones
to
is
replace that.
Dre Jones is gone, and Uchenna Nwasu may also be gone, and that's why an edge rusher is needed because you've got 2 guys, but you need depth. You can't expect your defense to work if one of those guys gets hurt. Um, and it's the NFL. People get hurt. So that becomes a thing. But again, you're looking at depth because you've got 2 starters.
Yeah.
Um, I think you're actually in pretty good shape everywhere on the defense except for maybe corner, where you've
Yes.
got 2 guys and you need 3 or 4 that will play a lot. Because even a guy like Josh Jobe isn't under contract for next year.
He's a restricted free agent. They're gonna give him a contract.
Yes, they will, but are they going to give him a $3 million contract for next year?
Probably. I mean, the
Because
kid's
that's what the tender
probably
is going to
worth
have
it.
to be.
Yeah. Well, I would think so. Yeah,
Um,
I would think so. I think that's a done deal. I think
and
when you get
so
a guy like Josh Jobe and he performs the way he did last year, he's going to be back.
yeah, I would have thought that about Trey Brown a year ago, but he came back and wasn't worth it. But yeah, they've had a lot of depth at corner in recent years, and that depth has really been it's gone away.
Yeah.
Mike Jackson's gone, Trey Brown's gonna be gone,
Artie
Jo-
Burns was injured a lot.
and yeah, and he's on and off the roster. Josh Jobe is not currently on the roster.
They
Um,
drafted 2 corners last year, of which one is fringy to begin with, coming back into this season with in Nehemiah Pritchett
and the other one is not.
on the roster anymore.
He's he's on a futures deal with another team, hoping to make a practice squad. Um, yeah,
And
that was
and a
kind of
lot of
pathetic.
people looked at Tariq Woolen as having a diminished year and not being consistent and so forth, and wondering if he's the future there. And I'm in that camp too. Is he the future? How does the coaching staff look at Woolen? You take a look at the advanced stats on Woolen though, and he's not as bad as we all think he is. I think
No, he's
that
better than
the
he's
the
a better
tackling could
player than
always
people
be
think.
improved with
Yep.
him, but the coverage stuff is pretty decent.
And the coaches love him. They benched him for
Yeah.
reasons, and
Because they
that
love
kind of
him.
stuff.
They benched him.
Well,
I mean,
because
there's some logic to that.
yeah, I mean, so because they want him to be great. And so they're holding him to a very high standard.
Right.
And so
They want him to play every down every time. And
yeah,
sometimes he gets his mind does not want to be there every play, every
yeah.
down.
And so they're working on, I mean, there's that. So you can kind of look at the defense and be like, other than corner, as long as Ernest Jones comes back,
Could upgrade maybe a third safety. They needed depth a little bit at inside linebacker. You know,
mhm.
they need
Yeah,
a replacement for Jonathan Hankins. I mean, there's some things that you can do on the defense that they will do, but
that will
they're
make the defense better, but they're not. Ooh, this is this gaping hole that's holding the team back.
right.
As long as
Other
they
than
get Ernest
re-signing
Jones
Ernest Jones,
re-signed,
right?
the defense is in that. That's why and we ended up going through all the position groups, but I kind of went to that side and was like, other than Ernest Jones and maybe a corner, the defense has needs, but they're going to be lower on the priority list. They're not guys you don't need to go get a superstar.
They're
Um,
plug and play type guys.
Yeah, on offense, figuring out the quarterback situation is something that's massive. Going and fixing some of the offensive line is this massive hole.
And a
And
third wide
then
receiver we haven't talked about.
a third wide receiver. That becomes the other one because you've got
And
DK,
potentially tight end.
and you've got um, JSN, but you're not running an effective offense with two wide receivers.
Right.
You've got
And
to
we
have
all know that Tyler Lockett's not coming back on a $31 million deal, even a
yeah.
$17 million deal.
Well, and Tyler Lockett is significantly diminished. At this point, he doesn't have the breakaway speed. He doesn't accelerate. He doesn't get the separation he used to.
So what is the tight guy like Tyler Lockett worth to you as far as leadership ability and 40 catches a year and 500 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns? What is a guy like that worth on a roster?
40 catches at wide receiver, and 2 or 3 touchdowns is worth $6 million on the open market.
That's exactly right. And that's what
And
we'd be
so,
trying to pay Tyler Lockett. And, he's going to get cut is basically what's going to
yeah, because
happen.
he's
And
not
whether
gonna
he
play for
comes back or not,
31.
I can't predict that. Players rarely do. In this type of situation, it would be a unique situation for Tyler. He's very, very well established in Seattle.
And doesn't want
People
to play
know
anywhere
that
else.
and doesn't want
Yeah.
to play anywhere else. So he may, if he wants to play next year, that's what it's going to take. He's going to have to eat some humble pie, unfortunately, and come
Yeah, but
back
I
on a
think he
very,
knows.
very diminished deal.
I don't know how humble pie it will be. I think he knows. I think he's um I think he's already come to grips with it.
Yeah.
Um and but yeah, you've got JSN and you got DK, and then you've got what behind him. Tyler's probably gone. And even if he comes back, he is not the elite third receiver that we want him to be.
Right. Jake
Um,
Bobo, Derek Young, and Cody White, while at times had some flash, but none of those three ever really developed.
no. Jake Bobo is a guy you want on the roster because he works his tail off blocking
Great special
and
teams.
getting downfield on special teams. Like, he does all the nitty gritty, dirty work that you have to have done, and he presents a unique target, being as tall as he is. Um, in the offense, but you're not going to get more than 25 or 30 receptions out of him. He's not a guy that gets separation all that well.
And a
Um,
number 4 wide receiver, you could take that.
oh yeah, from number 4, number 5 wide receiver, that's fine, but he's not a 3.
No,
Um,
no.
and no, and
Cody White showed enough where you could say,
did he?
okay, this guy really
He showed
flashed in a
he showed a
couple.
lot in one game.
Yeah, well, he did show a lot in one game. I thought he showed enough that he should have been developed more, and it just didn't happen. And kind of made me question the coaching staff there on the offensive side as far as developing those 3, 4, 5 guys.
Well, it came down to, who are you going to put in the game when you're trying to win? Cody White or Tyler Lockett or Jake Bobo?
What
Like
does
Cody
it say
White.
to you where we literally threw for almost the most attempts in the NFL, and those guys still didn't develop?
Um, that what it tells me is that the it tells me a little bit like what I want to say. And I know you're like, oh well, it's the coaching, whatever. I'm like, maybe these guys just aren't. They're just the talent isn't there.
Hmm.
I mean, Cody White's been bouncing around the league for 6 years.
Hmm.
And yeah, he shows flashes. We know he's tall and he's got some speed.
Hmm.
And he came out in that one game and just looked the part. But it was one game, and he got playing time in a bunch of games and only showed up in one. Jake
Yeah.
Bobo is out there a lot throughout the season and got 25 catches. He's out there because he does the things. He does the blocking and the
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. But he's not um, a guy that's going to develop into a 60 catch a year receiver. He doesn't have the speed for
So
that.
I definitely see the Seahawks drafting a wide receiver sometime at some point in this draft. Don't
Hmm.
It's hard to predict when those things happen, but talk to me. It's too early kind of for us to really throw out some names as far as wide receivers available, but I do think that they bring in kind of a prototypical number three type wide receiver out of free agency to hedge
I
the
would,
draft.
yeah, I don't, yeah, I mean, they'll bring in someone. You, you were really high on Laviska Shenault when they signed him,
I thought he had some
um,
upside. Yeah.
and it turned
Turns
out
out
to
I
be
was wrong.
that was bad. I don't want them to go that route again. Honestly, I would. You've got two guys that are elite. Go draft, um, a guy that can give you something. You're going to bring Jake Bobo back as probably your number four. Um, and then yeah, go
Well,
find someone.
somebody that's going to give you something out of the draft in their rookie year is going to be at least a third rounder or above.
Yeah, and that's fair. But they don't have to give you elite numbers. You don't have to go get DK Metcalf.
No, but 40 catches.
Yeah, go get someone who can, um, you know, at least challenge for your top three. With Bobo and try and get in there. Just give yourself some more upside over the Derek Young, Cody Whites that seem to
Agreed.
be really good at special teams and not much on offense. You've got too many special teams players at wide receiver and not enough receivers.
So one of the other positions, and the last position I really want to touch on, is we both agreed when we did the salary cap show last week that Noah Fant may be on the block to
Mm-hmm.
cut and reduce that cap number, just based on production and so forth. He just doesn't produce enough for where he's at now. If we lose Fant and we've really only got AJ Barner as being a proven commodity at tight end, that position will be addressed.
Oh, absolutely.
Now,
It's probably going to be
what
addressed
do you
anyway
think?
because Pharaoh Brown's gone and should
Yes,
not be brought back.
right.
Um,
Brady Russell's proven to just be special teams kind of a player.
yeah, and he struggled to stay healthy. So
Yeah,
they need a tight end. They do. So they're going to go find if they keep Fant, they'll find a developmental project, a guy that athletically is unique and that they can teach um, to be the third tight end. If Noah Fant is gone, they're gonna have to go find a tight end that can play.
kind of a receiving tight end.
Yeah, or unless they believe that Barner is going to take a major step in that.
Mm. Or they
So
find a really good wide receiver project that could take some of those. You
or
know,
yeah, maybe they move if you're a receiving tight end. Maybe that's how you get Jake Bobo more receptions, being
yeah,
given his like size because he's so freaking tall. He's not wide like a tight end, so you're not asking him to block in line. He's good at blocking downfield against safeties, not against offensive linemen. But you can use him in ways that mimic what you do your move tight end and do some stuff that way. And that might end up being the road that they take with this. Is it's a way to get him more catches and more involvement, um, and do it in a much cheaper way than Noah
potentially.
Fant.
Yeah, because one of the things they're going to have to do, I think, for me, is they're going to have to upgrade their swing tackle situation on the roster too.
Well, they don't
Michael
have a
Jarrell's,
choice.
yeah, Michael Jarrell's there, but he really showed that he didn't belong on the field yet. Now, obviously, a full offseason could improve upon that.
He was a
The other
massive
guys,
project when they
George Fant's
drafted him.
still under contract, but he's a guy that you could potentially cut just to save some cap. Stone Forsythe has proven that he can no longer.
He's gone.
He's not a
not
guy
even on
that
the
you
roster.
can do.
He's not even on the roster.
Well, he's an IR guy, but
he's a free agent after this year. So
correct.
He is not on the roster, and why would you bring him back? So
because he'd be exceedingly cheap. That's why. So that'd be another thing that they might look at in the draft or look at in cheap free agency. A guy like John Schneider likes to hedge the draft a little bit and kind of fill those spots with at least a very inexpensive veteran player that you could potentially cut. So no guaranteed money type of a thing out of camp. Anything else you want to talk about?
No. I mean, looking at Seattle's the people that are free agents, that they could bring back for next year. Ernest Jones jumps off the page as God. You've got to go get him re-signed now. Jerron Reed is there as an older guy that you'd like to have back in your rotation there, and maybe Josh Jobe who's a restricted guy, so he would be easy to return. Is there anyone else in that list of free agents that you're like, God, they've got to go? No. I mean, Trey Brown, no. Artie Burns, Travis Gibson, John Hankins, Lincoln Tomlinson, John Ross.
I think you've got to move off Jonathan Hankins. You could easily say, well, I could throw, $1.5 million back at him and he could come back and compete in camp or whatever. But I don't see him making it out of camp if John Schneider and company do the job they need to do to improve the roster and take the next step. That defensive tackle position, is really, really important. And I think they need to do a better job of helping Byron Murphy be able to move more outside and get more opportunities to impact the rush and the quarterback this season. And they need a defensive tackle to do that. The good news is this is a very rich defensive tackle free agency group coming in.
And it's not a bad from very early look, not a bad draft class either.
Yeah. So I expect that to happen. That is going to happen. Guys sitting out there like Roy Lopez from Arizona would be a good, cheap option. Puna Ford is out there again. I thought Puna Ford had a great year with the Chargers this year. You could re-sign Jerron Reed.
Fit. Yeah.
DJ Jones is out there. Greg Gaines, who went to Washington. People are familiar with him. Bobby Brown from the Rams. That would be a dream scenario. I think he's going to cost too much, probably north of $10 million.
I would say this:
year,
if you look at defensive tackle, right? Who are your top 5 defensive linemen? It's a 3-4, right? You've got Williams, obviously, Byron Murphy, Jerron Reed, Roy Robertson Harris, and
I don't think he's going to be back.
And the giant
Mike Morris.
No, he didn't play. And
Cameron Young.
See what I mean? Like where are your other guys? Who's your other rotational guy?
Right.
Jonathan Hankins was one of those names. So of those top 5 guys, only Williams and Murphy are currently on the roster for next year. And so unless you expect Mike Morris to suddenly become good in year 4, after 3 years of disappointment.
This would be his third year coming up.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, unless you expect a guy like that to suddenly make this massive jump that he had every opportunity to this year and didn't do. They need
Right.
rotational help. That's why
Yes.
they made the trade for Roy Robertson Harris.
Yes.
Mid-season was because they just didn't have enough bodies to rotate on that defensive line. And so that is something to watch because they need to figure that out. I expect Jerron Reed to be invited back
I do too.
on a reasonable deal. And you're right. If Hankins will play for the league minimum, they might invite him back just to be a body. But they're gonna have to sign a guy and they're gonna have to draft a guy.
Agreed. Yeah. And just looking ahead to the draft, we've got 8 picks projected. The 18th pick in the first round, also picks in the second, third, and seventh round are native. We also are in line to get 3 compensation comp picks. Damian Lewis should bring in a 4th rounder, Jordan Brooks a 5th, Wagner a 6th. And we also own Chicago's pick in the 6th round from the Darrell Taylor trade. So 8 total picks in the draft should be able to allow us to load up. It's the draft is a little top heavy, like 1 through 10, first round grade wise, and then there's different sweet spots in the draft that look promising. And overall, the draft is good for depth, but not a lot of blue chippers. So, I think Seattle can do fairly well in the first couple picks. They've 18 overall, and then they draft 50th. Out of those two. Those 2 picks, they need to come away with impact players, I think.
Yeah, in this draft, those are actually pretty decent places to be because, like you said, there's the blue chippers are all in the top 10. They don't extend down into the teens, and so you're going to be able to get like.
In fact, it would be a potential trade back draft, I think, for John Schneider.
Yeah, because if you move off 18, let's say you get down to 24. You're much more comfortable taking a guard at 24 than at 18 if you're going to do that. Or maybe you wait until 50, but it allows you to trade back and get a defensive tackle and a later, a mid-round pick that then you can use on a corner type of that kind of situation. They're in good, like they're in these one of those pockets for both those drafts, some of those pockets where you're going to get value. Without, you're not really overdrafting anyone. You're not, but you're also not in a position where, if we move up 3 spots and sell the farm, we can get,
yes,
you know what I mean? Like that person worthy of moving up for, I just don't see being there, in this draft. So, yeah. But that also means that if they're willing to move back and there isn't someone they would want to move up for, would there be someone behind them willing to give up enough to move up, to make it worthwhile for Seattle? So, yeah, there's some of that there as well.
Yeah, anything can happen in the draft, and guys like Mason Graham, interior defensive lineman, might drop, and there's teams that would come up for him. Maybe a guy like Kelvin Banks, junior offensive tackle, is dropping for some reason. It's interesting. There's a couple of quarterbacks that are interesting that have second, third round grades now that I think will be forced up to the top, artificially, elevating their draft stock. They a good Senior Bowl, good workout at the combine, and we see this all the time. And Seattle could get into that situation, where that could happen, where they might look at a guy like Jalen Milroe, who I think is going to get overdrafted. There's another kid, Tyler Booker, I think is a name associated that people are looking at for Seattle as an interior offensive lineman out of Alabama, physicality, finisher, all that kind of stuff. We'll see how he does in the Senior Bowl. But that'll be kind of a player that I would think would do well. The draft stuff is just interesting, but it's, as we've seen, it's so hit and miss. Like, we missed last year with the Haynes pick, who everyone thought would come in and immediately have an impact or compete for a starting role right away. It just doesn't happen. And a guy like Tyrese Knight, who we thought initially was overdrafted and really was kind of a special teams guy the first year, came in and played a really good role right away. Byron Murphy is the best defensive player in the draft, and he kind of has an okay season coming up. I expect more out of him. I think, moving him around a little bit more on the defensive line to get him more opportunities to have an impact would be a benefit for him. So the draft is just so difficult to project, and that's why it's so fun for us, because we try, as best as we can. All right, let's get out of here. I think our next show, let me see what our next show schedule outline looks like. We are doing a high level look at free agency, and trying to marry up our roster needs with free agents available at different position groups. So that'll be a fun show as well. Give us a chance to take a deeper dive into free agency. I've already put together a few different lists and so forth, but long ways to go before I'm ready to go with that show. Anything else, Keith? And we'll get out of here.
No, let's call it a show, and we'll, report back here in a couple of days.
All right. Hopefully, when that OC spot gets solidified and we've got that to talk about, we'll definitely put a show together for just that, and that'll be fun. So follow Keith at Myers NFL on all the social stuff. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform, our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, like it, leave a comment, all that good stuff. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.